Welcome back to another episode, guys. Today is ICE Crackdown, which sparks protests and Iran tensions rise, as well as America on the edge. Right now, I see the situation surrounding the ICE deportations, nationwide protests, and the political fallout as one of the most volatile flashpoints in American politics. The enforcement policy and public outrage accountability questions, and the deep constitutional debates. ICE leadership has publicly defended an expanded deportation effort, pointing to large increases in the removal of broader operational authority and a surge in manpower as part of what they describe as fulfilling a mandate to strictly enforce immigration law and to deter unlawful entry. At the same time, the multiple high-profile enforcement incidents, including the fatal encounters between the federal agents and civilians, have ignited the intense backlash in cities like Minneapolis and Chicago, where sustained demonstrations have drawn thousands of protests demanding justice and reform. I'm watching these demonstrations range from peaceful marches to tense standoffs outside of the federal buildings, with some arrests occurring when crowds refuse dispersal orders and the federal officers reportedly or allegedly drawing weapons in confrontations. Now, as these protests have grown, the courts have stepped in, reinforced the First Amendment protections, with judges issuing preliminary injunctions that ban certain crowd control tactics and also bars federal agents from detaining peaceful observers simply for monitoring the enforcement actions. I believe these rulings show the judiciary stepping up to protect the constitutional rights even amid political conflict. Public opinion seems increasingly divided, with polls indicating discomfort among many Americans over the scale and tone of the enforcement, even as others argue that strict deportation measures are necessary for the broader security and rule of law. Politically, this division has put lawmakers in a very difficult position. Some push for the increased oversight of ICE and independent investigations into the use of force incidents, while others argue that the criticism weakens the enforcement and emboldens unlawful activity. Now, layered into this debate over who is organizing and funding the protests, with some officials, commentators alleging the outside influence, including groups of foreign ties seeking to undermine the U.S. institutions. While those claims circulate, the available reporting indicates that most of the demonstrations, especially the large events like the Minnesota protests, are being organized by the local immigrants' rights groups, labor unions, and student organization and advocacy networks, rather than the advanced and coordinated foreign interference. As of now, there have been no broad, publicly substantiated criminal cases targeting individuals solely for funding peaceful protests, and the activity and legal protections for political speech and assembly remain strong. In my view, the accountability efforts would require concrete proof of the unlawful coordination rather than the mere political opposition, making the boundary between activism and illegal action a central part of the current debate. Now, at the same time, I see the U.S. politics and foreign policy are colliding in ways that could shape both domestic elections and the global stability. As Congress remains deeply divided over the funding priorities, immigration policy, executive authority, and the federal spending legislative gridlock has contributed to a partial government shutdown, which is in ongoing disputes over border security, asylum reforms, and the balance of the powers, while public sentiment toward core institutions show growing polarization and scrutiny. On the international front, the United States foreign policy is sharply focused on the Middle East, especially the high-stakes diplomatic engagement with Iran over its nuclear program, where U.S. and Iranian officials recently held indirect talks signaling cautious dialogue alongside the deep mistrust. Iran's leadership has publicly denied seeking nuclear weapons and reiterated its willingness to negotiate, while unresolved issues around verification and enrichment continue to make progress difficult. Amid these diplomatic efforts, the United States has bolstered its military presence in the region, including considerations of additional aircraft carrier deployments, and President Trump has warned that further action could follow if talks fail, underscoring the risk of escalation. Meanwhile, Iran is navigating the internal turmoil with the widespread protests and the brutal crackdowns that have drawn global criticism, and it has led international sanctions targeting senior Iranian officials over the violent repression. These tensions are complicated by allied concerns, with leaders like Israel's prime minister urging the United States to ensure a nuclear deal also addresses ballistic missile deployment and regional proxy support, even as Iran resists excluding enrichment from negotiations. All this unfolds against the backdrop of a broader strains in the international order as well, and the global economic realignments are front and center. Looking ahead, I believe the administration's path forward reflects a dual track strategy at home, continuing the aggressive immigration enforcement while signaling an openness to limit oversight adjustments in response to the court's ruling and public scrutiny, maintaining the pressure on Congress for additional border funding and rapid expanded enforcement authority, even as the lawmakers debate the guardrails around use of force standards and civil liberty protections. I expect the White House to lean into the messaging centered on restoring order, reinforcing the rule of law, and demonstrating the operational control, while also navigating the mounting and legal challenges of the electoral pressures that could shape how far those policies can advance. Abroad, I see calibrated postures toward Iran, pushing the diplomacy forward while keeping visible military deterrence in place to strengthen negotiation leverage without triggering open conflict. As the margin of miscalculation remains thin, at the same time, I recognize that managing regional tensions, embedding human rights concerns, and addressing security priorities within any potential nuclear framework will present a complex political hurdle, both internationally as well as domestically. What we are witnessing is not one isolated controversy, but a convergence of enforcement policy, constitutional debate, geopolitical brinksmanship, alliance management, and electoral calculations, all unfolding in real time. The administration's continued plans moving forward on these topics signal a determination to protect strength at the border and abroad while navigating legal constraints. Public opinion shifts and congressional resistance, whether this approach stabilizes the tensions or deepens them, I think will define much of the political landscape in the months ahead. If you found this breakdown helpful and want clear, unfiltered analysis on the issues shaping our country and the world, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the Unfiltered Political Lens Podcast. And until next time, peace.